4Imagine that one day you are summoned to the government panel, even though you haven't committed any crime or been formally charged with one. You are repeatedly questioned upon your political views, accused of disloyalty, and asked to incriminate your friend and associate. If you don't cooperate, you risk jail or losing your job. This is exactly what happened in the United States in the 1915 as a part of a campaign to expose suspected communists, named after the most notorious practitioner. The phenomenon this thousands of rising careers. For over a decade, American political leaders trampled democratic freedoms in the name of protecting them. During the 1930s and 1940s, there were active but small Communist Party in the United States. Its record was mixed, but it played crucial roles in world politics. Also supported the Soviet Union. From the start, the American Communist Party faced attacks from conservatives and business leaders, as well as from liberals who criticized its ties to oppressive Soviet regime. During World War II, when the US and USSR were allied against Hitler, some American communists actually spied for the Russian. Espionage became known. Domestic communism came to be seen as a threat to national security, but attempts to eliminate that threat soon turned into the longest widespread episode of political repression in American history, spurred on by bureaucrats, politicians, journalists, and businessmen. The campaign largely exaggerated the danger of communist subversion. The people behind it harassed suspected of left-of-center political views or associating with those who did. If you hung modern art on your walls, had a multiracial social circle, or signed a petition against nuclear weapons, you might just have been a communist. Starting in the 1940s, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover used the resources of his agency to hunt down such supposed communists and eliminate them from any position of influence within American society. And the narrow criteria that Hoover and his allies used to screen federal employees spread to the rest of the country. soon Hollywood studios, universities, car manufacturers, and thousands of other public and private employees, and imposing same political women who worked for them. Meanwhile, Congress conducted its own witch hunt, subpoena hundreds of people, investigative bodies like the House Un-American Activities Committee. If the least cooperate, they could be jailed for contempt or more commonly fired and blacklisted. Ambitious politicians like Richard Nixon and Joseph McCarthy used such hearings as a partisan weapon, accusing Democrats of being soft on communism and deliberately losing China to the communist bloc. McCarthy, a Republican senator from Wisconsin, became notorious by flaunting ever-changing lists of alleged communists within the State Department. Egged on by other politicians, he continued to make outrageous accusations while distorting fabricating evidence. Many citizens reviled McCarthy, while others praised him. And when the Korean War broke out, McCarthy seemed vindicated. Once he became chair of Senate's permanent subcommittee on investigations, McCarthy's recklessness increased. It was his investigation of the army that finally turned public opinion against him and diminished his power. McCarthy's colleagues in the Senate censored him, and he died less than 3 years later, probably from alcoholism. McCarthyism ended as well. It had ruined hundreds, if not thousands, of lives, drastically narrowed the American political spectrum. Its damage to the institutions would be long-lasting. In all likelihood, there are Democrats who knew that anti-communist parties were deeply unjust, but feared that directly opposing them would hurt their careers. Even the Supreme Court failed to stop the witch hunt, condoning serious violations of constitutional rights in the name of national security. Was domestic communism an actual threat to the American government? Perhaps, though small. But the reaction, so extreme, damaged self, and appeared in uncertain time to attack unpopular minorities in the name of patriotism. Could it all happen again? The presidency of the United States of America is often said to be one of the most powerful positions in the world. But of the US president accused of misusing that power, only one has left office as a result. Richard Nixon deserves to remember for Mah-Jong scandals ended his presidency. Find out as we put this disgraced president legacy on trial in history. Richard Nixon. Order. Now, who is the defendant today? Some kind of clock? No, Your Honor. This is Nelson Nixon, the 37th President of the United States, who served from 1969 to 74. Hold on. As the number of years served. Where you see President Nixon resigned for the good of the nation. President who took over after him. He resigned because he was about to be impeached and full extent of his crime exposed. What were these crimes? Your Honor, the Watergate scandal was one of the grossest abuses of presidential power in history. Nixon broke into the Democratic National Committee headquarters to wiretap the offices and dig up that opponent for the re-election. It was established the president did not honor burglary. But as soon as he learned it, he did everything to cover it, while lying about it. But yet, it was for the good of the country. He did so much during his time in office and could have done so much more without a scandal jeopardizing his accomplishment? Yes, Your Honor. Did you know it was President Nixon who proposed the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency and signed National Environmental Policy Act into law? Not to mention Endangered Species Act, Marine Mammal Protection Act, Expansion Clean Air Act. Sounds pretty progressive of him? Hardly. Nixon's presidential campaign quoted Southern voters who refused to resign civil rights movement. Speaking on civil rights, the prosecution may be surprised to learn he signed the Title IX Amendment banning gender-based discrimination in education and showed desegregation in school. He lowered the voting age to 18 so that students could vote. He didn't have much concern for students after 4 were shot by the National Guard at Kent State. Instead, he called them banned for protesting the Vietnam War, a war he had campaigned on ending, but he did end it. He ended it 2 years after taking office. Meanwhile, his campaign sabotaged the previous president's best, urging the Southern Vietnamese to hold out the supposed better terms, which I might add didn't materialize. He probably acted for years troops and over 1 million more Vietnamese died for nothing. Presidency candidate interfering in foreign negotiations? Isn't that treason? It is, Your Honor. It's a clear violation of the Logan Act 1799. Oh, I think we are forgetting President Nixon's many foreign policy achievements. It was he who normalized ties with China. For economic ties continue today. We saw good thing, and don't forget his coup in Chile. The democratically elected President Allende with the brutal military dictator. It was a part of a fight against communism. One tyranny and the violence reason we opposed communism to be or was just a fear of lower class again rising. President Nixon could have predicted the President Pinochet's regime, and being anti didn't mean neglecting poor. He proposed guaranteed basic income for all American families, still a radical concept today, and he even pushed comprehensive healthcare reform, just kind of passed 4 years later. Burger business was a clock on now. Your Honor, President Nixon may have violated a law too, but little harm compared to all he accomplished while in office. The harm was to democracy itself. The whole point the idea claimed abroad, lead accountable to the people, and when they hold themselves above the law for whatever reason, those ideals are undermined and are hold accountable to the law of it. Many politicians have compromised for some people to achieve results, but law-breaking and cover-ups threaten the very fabric. Those who do so may find then history is put on trial. Country was on the path to tyranny. If you saw one man gaining too much power, would you try to stop him? Even if that man was one of your closest friends and allies? These were the questions haunting Roman Senator Marcus Junius Brutus in 44 BCE, the year Julius Caesar would be assassinated. Imposing unchecked power wasn't just a political matter for Brutus, it was a personal one. He claimed descent from Lucius Junius Brutus, who had helped overthrow the tyrannical king known as Turkine the Proud. Instead of seizing power himself, the elder Brutus led the people in a rousing oath to never gain allow a king to rule. Rome became the public, based on no one should hold too much power. Now, half a century later, this principle was threatened. Julius Caesar's rise to the has been dramatic. Years of military triumphs had made him the wealthiest man in Rome, and after defeating his rival Pompey the Great in the Civil War, his power was at its peak. His victory and such distributing lands to the poor had made him popular, and many senators vied for his favor by showering him with honor. Statues were built, temples were dedicated, and with names still called July today. More importantly, the title of dictator meant a grand temporary emergency power in wartime had been bestowed upon Caesar several times in succession. And in 44 BCE, he was made dictator perpetual, dictator for a potentially unlimited term. All of this was too much for the senator who feared a return to the monarchy. They answered to abolish it, as well as those whose own power and ambition were impeded by Caesar's rule. A group of conspirators calling themselves the Liberators began to secretly discuss plans for assassination. Leading them were the Senator Gaius Cassius Longinus and his friend and brother-in-law Brutus. Joining the conspiracy was not an easy choice for Brutus, even though Brutus sided with them in the Civil War. Caesar had personally intervened to save his life, not only pardoning him, but even accepting him as a close advisor and elevating him to important posts. Brutus was hesitant to conspire against a man who had treated it like a son, but in the end, Cassius insists Brutus is unfair. Caesar's ambitions won out. The moment voting came on March 15th. At the Senate meeting, shortly before Caesar was to depart on his next military campaign, as many as 60 conspirators surrounded him, unseized daggers, and stabbing at him from all sides. As the story goes, Caesar struggled fiercely until he saw Brutus. Despite the famous line, "A tu brute Shakespeare," we don't know Caesar's actual dying. Some ancient sources claim to say nothing, while others record the phrase, "And you, child?" Fearing speculation, Brutus may have actually Caesar's illegitimate son. But all agree that when Caesar Brutus among his he covered his face and gave up the fight, falling to the ground after being stabbed 23 times. Unfortunately for Brutus, he and any other conspirators had underestimated his popularity among the Roman public, many of whom saw him as an effective leader and sent as a corrupt aristocracy. Within moments of assassination, Rome was in a state of panic. Most of these senators have fled. The assassin barricaded themselves, kept trying him. Mark Antony, Caesar's friend, co-consul, was swift to seize, apprehend, delivering passionate days later that waved craft in frenzy of grief and anger. As a result, the liberators were forced out of Rome. The ensuing power vacuum led to a series of civil wars, during which Brutus, facing certain defeat, took his own life. The materialism would be the opposite conspirators had hoped to accomplish. The end of the Republic, and the concentration of the power under the office of emperor. Opinions over the assassination of Caesar were divided from the start and, and have remained so. As for Brutus himself, few historical figures have inspired such a conflicting legacy. In Dante's funeral, he was praised by Satan himself for his crime of betrayal. The swift Garber's travel described him as the most virtuous and benevolent people to have lived. The interpretation of Brutus as either a selfless fight against dictatorship or an opportunistic narrator has shifted with tides of history. But even today, over 2,000 years later, questions about the price of liberty, the conflict between personal loyalties and universal ideas, and unintended consequences remain more relevant than ever. Imagine that one day you are summoned before the government panel, even though you haven't committed any crime or been formally charged with one. You are repeatedly questioned about your political views, accused of disloyalty, and asked to incriminate your friends and associates. If you don't cooperate, you risk jail or losing your job. This is exactly what happened in the United States in the 1950s. As a part of a campaign to expose suspected communists, named after its most notorious practitioner, the phenomenon known as Marxism destroyed thousands of lives and careers. For over a decade, American political leaders trampled democratic freedoms in the United of protecting them. During the 1930s and 1940s, the small Communist Party in the United States, its record was mixed. While it played crucial roles in wider progressive for labor and civil rights, it also supported the Soviet Union. For the American Communist Party faced attacks from conservatives and business leaders, as well as liberals who criticized its ties to the oppressive Soviet regime. During World War II, when the USSR were allied against Hitler, some of American communists actually spied for the Russians, and the Cold War accelerated, and this espionage became known. Domestic communism came to be seen as a threat to national security, but the attempt to eliminate the threat soon turned into the longest-lasting and most widespread episode of political repression in American history. Spurred on by a network of bureaucrats, politicians, journalists, and businessmen, the campaign widely exaggerated the danger of communist subversion. The people behind it harassed anyone suspected of holding left-of-center political views or associated with those who did. If you hung on your walls, had a multiracial social circle who signed the petition against nuclear weapons, you might just have been a communist. Starting in the 1940s, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover used the resources of his agency to hunt down such proposed communists and eliminate them from any position of influence within American society. In the narrow criteria that Hoover and allies used to screen federal employees spread to the rest of the country. Universities, car manufacturers, and thousands of other public and private employers were imposing the same political tests on the men and women who worked for them. Meanwhile, Congress conducted its own witch hunt, subpoenaing hundreds of people to testify before investigative bodies like the House Un-American Activities Committee. If the jailed for committee, more commonly fired blacklisted. Ambitious politicians like Richard Nixon and Joseph McCarthy used such hearings as a partisan weapon, accusing Democrats of being soft on communism and deliberately losing China to the communist bloc. McCarthy, a Republican senator from Wisconsin, became notorious by flaunting ever-changing lists of alleged communists within the State Department. Egged on by other politicians, he continued to make outrageous accusations while distorting or fabricating evidence. Many citizens reviled McCarthy, while others praised him. And when the Korean War broke out, McCarthy seemed vindicated. Once he became chair of the Senate's Permanent Subcommittee on Investigation in 1953, McCarthy's recklessness increased. It was his investigation of the army that finally turned public opinion against him and diminished his power. McCarthy's colleagues in the Senate censored him, and he died less than 3 years later, probably from alcoholism. McCarthyism ended as well. It had ruined hundreds, if not thousands, of lives, and thus narrowed the American spectrum. Its damage to democratic institutions would be long-lasting. In all likelihood, there were both Democrats and Republicans who knew that the anti-communist parties were deeply unjust, but feared that directly opposing them would hurt their careers. Even the Supreme Court failed to stop the witch hunt, condoning serious violations of constitutional rights in the name of national security. Was domestic communism an actual threat to the American government? Perhaps, though small one. But the reaction to it was so extreme that it caused far more damage than the threat itself. In the new demagogues appeared in the uncertain time to attack unpopular minorities in the name of patriotism. Could it all happen again? Imagine that one day you are summoned before a government panel, even though you haven't committed any crime or been formally charged with one. You are repeatedly questioned about your political views, accused of disloyalty, and asked to incriminate your friends and associates. If you don't cooperate, you risk jail or losing your job. This is exactly what happened in the United States as a part of a campaign to expose suspected communists, named after its most notorious practitioner, The phenomenon known as McCarthyism destroyed thousands of lives and careers. For overall decades, American political leaders trampled democratic freedoms in the name of protecting them. During the 1930s, 1940s, there had been an active but small Communist Party in the United States. Its record was mixed, but the crucial role in wider progressive struggle for labor and civil rights. It also supported the Soviet Union. From the start, the American Communist Party faced attacks from conservatives and business leaders, as well as from liberals who criticized its ties to the oppressive Soviet regime. During World War II, when the USA and the USSR were allied against Hitler, some American communists actually spied for the Russians. When the Cold War escalated and this espionage became known, domestic communism came to be seen as a threat to the national security, but the attempt to eliminate the threat soon turned into the longest lasting and most widespread episode of political repression in American history. Spurred on by a network of bureaucrats, politicians, journalists, and businessmen, became the campaign widely exaggerated the danger of communist subversion. The people behind it harassed anyone who suspected of holding left-of-center political views or associated with those who did. If you hung modern art on your walls, had a multiracial social circle, or signed petitions against nuclear weapons, you might just have been a communist. Starting in late 1940s, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover used the resources of his agency to hunt down such supposed communists and eliminate them from any positions in influence within American society. And the narrow criteria that Hoover and his allies used to screen federal employees spread to the rest of the country. Soon, Hollywood studios, universities, car manufacturers, and thousands of other public and private employers were imposing the same political tests on the men and the women who worked for them. Meanwhile, Congress conducted its own witch hunt, subpoenaing hundreds of people to testify before investigative bodies like the House Un-American Activities Committee. If they refused to cooperate, they could be jailed and contempt, or more commonly fired and blacklisted. Ambitious politicians like Richard Nixon and Joseph McCarthy used such hearings as a partisan weapon, accusing Democrats of being soft communists, deliberately losing China communist bloc. McCarthy was a Republican senator from Wisconsin, became notorious by flaunting ever-changing lists and alleged communists within the State Department. Egged on by other politicians, he continued to make outrageous accusations while distorting and fabricating evidence. Many students reviled McCarthy, while others praised him. And the Korea War broke out. McCarthy seemed vindicated, and he became chair of the Senate of Panel's Subcommittee on Investigations in 1953. McCarthy's restlessness increased. It was his investigation of the army that finally turned public opinion against him and diminished his power. McCarthy's colleagues in the Senate considered him, and he died less than 3 years later, probably from alcoholism. McCarthy's ended as well, and it had ruined hundreds in the theoretical knowledge of the American political spectrum. Its damage to democratic institutions would be long-lasting. In all likelihood, the Democrat, anti-communist parties were deeply unjust, but fear direct opposing careers. Even the Supreme Court failed to stop the witch hunt, condoning serious violation of constitutional rights in the name of national security. Was domestic communism an actual threat to the American government? Perhaps, though small one. Reaction to it, so extreme, would far more damage than the threat itself. And new demagogues appeared in uncertain time to attack unpopular minorities in the name of patriotism. But it all happened again. But it all happened again. But it all happened. The United States of America is often said to be one of the most powerful positions in the world. But of all US presidents accused of misusing that power, only one has left office as a result. Does Richard Nixon deserve to be remembered for more than the scandal that ended his presidency? Find out as we put this disgraced president's legacy on trial in history versus Richard Nixon. Order. Now, who is the defendant today? Is it some kind of clock? Your Honor. This is Richard Milhouse Nixon, the 37th President of the United States, who served from 1969 to 1974. Hold on. Has been a number of presidents where President Nixon resigned for the good of the nation, and pardoned by President Ford, who took over after him. He resigned because he was about to be impeached, and he didn't want the full extent of his crime exposed. What? His crimes? Your Honor. The Watergate scandal was one of the grossest abuses of presidential power in history. Nixon broke into the Democratic National Committee headquarters to wiretap the office and dig up that bonus for the re-election campaign. It was established that the president did not order this burglary, but as soon as he learned of it, he did everything to cover it up, while lying about it for months. Well, yes, but it was for the good of the country. He did so much during his time in office and could have done so much more without scandal jeopardizing his accomplishments. Yes, Your Honor. Did you know it was President Nixon who proposed the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency and signed the National Environmental Policy Act into law? Not mention the Endangered Species Act, the Marine Mammal Protection Act, expansion of the Clean Air Act. Sounds pretty progressive? Hardly. Nixon's presidential campaign courted Southern voters through fear and resentment of the civil rights movement. And speaking seriously, prosecution may be surprised at the amendment. banning gender-based discrimination in education, and he ensured desegregated schools occurred peacefully and toward age 18 so that students could vote. He didn't have much concern for students after 4 were shot by the National Guard at Kent State. Instead, he called them banned for protesting the Vietnam War, a war he had campaigned on ending. But he did ended it. Ended 2 years after taking office. Meanwhile, his campaign had sabotaged the previous president's peace talk, as in southern Vietnamese government holdout support, which I might add didn't materialize. He acted for 4 years, in which 20,000 more U.S. troops and more million Vietnamese died for nothing. President candidate interfering, isn't that treason? It is, Your Honor, a clear violation of the Logan Act of 1799. I think we are forgetting President Nixon's many foreign policy achievements. It was he who normalized ties with China, forging economic ties that continue today. Are we so sure? And don't forget his support of the coup in Chile that replaced the democratically elected President Allende with a brutal military dictator. It was a part of the fight against communism, where tyranny and violence opposed communism to begin with, or just rising up against the rich. President Nixon could never predict the violent Pinochet regime, and being anti-communist didn't mean neglecting poor. He proposed guaranteed basic income for all American families, still a radical concept today. And he even pushed comprehensive healthcare reform. Just 40 years later. I'm still confused about this burger business. Was he a crook or not? Your Honor, President Nixon may have violated a law or two. What was the real harm compared to all his accomplishments while in office? The harm was to democracy itself. The whole point of the ideas Nixon claimed to promote abroad is that leaders were accountable to the people, and when they hold themselves above the law for whatever reason, those ideals are undermined, and then folk accountable to the law are being out of the door. Many politicians have compromised some principles to achieve results, but law-breaking and cover-ups threaten the very fabric the nation is built on. Those who do so may find their entire legacy tainted, and history is put on trial. What would you do if you thought your country was on the path to tyranny? If you saw one man gaining too much power, would you try to stop him? Even if that man was one of your closest friends or allies? Caesar worked the question hunting Roman senator Marcus Junior in 44 BCE, the year Julius Caesar would be assassinated. Opposing unchecked power wasn't just a political matter for Brutus, it was a personal one. He claimed descent from Lucius Junius Brutus, who had helped overthrow the tyrannical known as token of the cross. Instead of seizing power himself into Brutus, let the people in the Rome to never again allow a king to rule. Rome became a republic based on the principle that no one man should hold too much power. Now, 4.5 centuries later, this principle was threatened. Julius Caesar's rise to the powerful position of consul had been dramatic. Years of military triumphs had made him a wealthiest man in Rome, and after defeating his rival Pompey the Great in a bitter civil war, his power was at its peak. His victories and initiatives such as distributing lands to the poor had made him popular with the public, and many senators vied for his favor by showering him with honor. Statues were built, temples were dedicated, and the whole month was renamed, still called July today. More important, meant to grant temporary emergency power in wartime had been bestowed several times in succession, and in 44 BCE he was made dictator perpetual, dictator for potentially unlimited term. All of this was too much for the senators, who feared that a return to the monarchy their ancestors had fought to abolish, as well as those whose own power were impeded by Caesar's rule. A group of conspirators calling themselves the Liberators began to secretly discuss plans to assassination, leading them Senator Gaius Cassius Longinus and his friend brother-in-law Brutus. Joining the conspiracy was not an easy choice for Brutus, even though Brutus had sided with Pompey in the earthquake. Caesar had personally intervened to save his life, not only pardoning him, but even accepting him as a close advisor and elevating him to important posts. Brutus was hesitant to conspire against the man who had treated him like a son, but in the end, Cassius' insistence and Brutus' own fear of Caesar's ambitions won out. The moment they had been waiting for came on March 15. At the Senate meeting held shortly before Caesar was to depart on his next military campaign, as many as 60 conspirators surrounded him, unseating daggers from the togas and stabbing at him from all sides. As the story goes, Caesar struggled fiercely until he saw Brutus. Despite the famous line, "Et tu Brutus," written by Shakespeare, we don't know Caesar's actual dying words. Some ancient sources claim he said nothing, while others record the phrase, "And you, Charles?" Fearing speculation, Brutus actually Caesar's illegitimate son. All agree Caesar saw Brutus among his attackers. He covered his face and gave up the fight, falling after being stabbed 23 times. Unfortunately for Brutus, he and the other conspirators had enormous popularity among the Roman public, many of whom saw his effectivity and the Senate was corrupt aristocracy. In the moment the assassination, Rome was in a state of immense panic. Most of the executives had fled, while the assassins barricaded themselves on the capital line here. Mark Antony, Caesar's friend and co-consul, was swift to seize the upper hand, delivering a passionate speech at Caesar's funeral days later. But that whipped the crowd into a frenzy and of grief and anger. As a result, the liberator were forced out of Rome. The ensuing vacuum led to a series of civil war. During that defeat took his own life. Ironically, the ultimate result would be the opposite of what the conspirators concerning power and the office of emperor. Opinion on the assassination of Caesar were divided from the start, and had remained so. As for rumor, few historical figures had inspired such conflicting legacy. In Dante's Inferno, he was placed in the very center of hell, and eternally chewed by Satan himself for his crime of betrayal. But Swiss Travel described him as one of the most virtuous and benevolent people to have lived. The interpretation of Brutus as either of selfless fight against dictatorship or an opportunism. But even today, over 2,000 years later, questions about the price of liberty, the conflict between personal loyalties and universal ideals, and unintended consequences remain more relevant than ever.